Hey everybody. I have a game today that I played. It's a really interesting game. I played one of the longer games that I usually do every week. I played against the Chess Free app on the level 10 setting, which is supposed to be a 1915 ELO rating. Again, if you haven't heard in some of my other videos, this is just a way that I get some longer games in a reliable way. Because again, it's hard to get long games in when you play online. So I set it at game in 60 plus a 10-second increment per move, and produces some really interesting games. And today's game was definitely a good example of that. It was a really interesting attacking game with a lot of tactical moments that are worth diving into. To get started, I had the white pieces, and for anybody who's like a big opening theoretician, first move that white played, knight a3. So this is really sort of bizarre. If you look in the chess.com database, there's like I think 13 games from this position. 13 games by masters from this position. Um, so it's a line. It's called the sodium attack for anyone who's interested. It's a good way to throw your opponents off balance, I guess. But yeah, it seems like the computer, the Chess Free Apps computer, will throw sort of weird moves at the outset at you. Um, it's hard to say why. My sort of theory is it gives you a couple of times, depending on what level of strength you had it set at. It gives you a couple of opportunities per game, and it kind of randomly assigns those opportunities. Um, and sometimes it just flat out will just play ridiculous moves in the opening, and then like be on point for the rest of the game. So even though if you were playing this game against the human, you see this move and you might be like, oh yeah, I'm in great shape. When I see a move like this against the computer, I'm like, oh man, if this is what the computer is going to give me is like its weak move, then I'm in for a tough game. So all that just for a bit of context. So I mean, against this move, I have no theory, of course, against this. So I'm just playing general opening principles and just real basic idea. Just grab the center. So I played d5, d4. Um, don't want to get my bishop locked behind the pawn chain. So before playing e6, I played bishop f5. They play bishop d2. I play e6, e3, knight to f6, c4, bishop e7, c5. I'll sort of go through these moves kind of quick. Nothing terribly interesting. I mean, black is building up a sort of advantage after white's weird first choice, but nothing is decisive in any way. So here I just made room for the bishop to retreat in case of knight h4s. And then queen b3. The first move that I want to look at is the move that I played in this position. So, and I want to look at this because I think it's instructive. I spent a little time on this move. And I was like, sort of what to do. How can I just ignore this threat against my b2 pawn? And I wasn't really coming up with anything, so I played rook b8, and it's fine. But just doing some analysis with the computer, it says instead, and I was really interested to see this, just going for the kind of pawn break that had been trying to build up. So before this, I was trying to do something like play here and then just sort of go for this break. The engine says just going for the break right here rather than protecting b7 is the way to go, which I think is a really instructive moment. I would not have thought that I had enough to make this break at this point. I mean, white is attacking this twice. I'm only defending it once. Again, this is hanging, but I mean, we'll see how this line plays out and see that this totally makes sense. So The most critical move that I want to look at is d takes e5. And here the solution is knight e4. Computer plays something like, like knight b5. And then we regain the pawn that was captured. We're hitting the queen. And everything is totally fine here for black. Black is actually doing very well in this position. The queen retreats. Black is just doing exceptionally well in this position. So again, looking at this e5, the point is these pawns get kind of broken up. And yeah, I mean, even if we don't give the computer like, if white doesn't play something like knight b5, say they play like queen takes d5, I mean, there's still options here. So c6, queen b3, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and then there's queen takes d2 in this kind of position. I mean, so in any case, a lot of these variations, like if you sort of go through the tactics, which it's kind of hard to see even over the board in the game that I was playing where it was a little bit longer. It's a complicated situation, but in any case, I thought an instructive moment to look at. But again, I chose the move rook b8, which was fine, just defending the pawn. So next, the computer just went ahead and castled, and I played knight to e4, just jumping in and hitting this bishop, making it hard for this knight to move. I thought it was an interesting move just to apply a little pressure. The computer responds with bishop b4. The engine suggests that this move, queen d1, just defending and freeing up this knight to do whatever, is probably fine. And I think that reflects the fact that in this particular position for white, this bishop is going to be kind of a stupid piece, right, with these pawns on these dark squares. So it's totally fine to just, let black take it and recapture with the queen. But yeah, the computer played bishop b4, and then, I jumped on the opportunity to sort of make this a stupid piece by locking the pawn structure. Queen a4, hitting a7, and I took some time on this move as well. It's a tricky situation, and I came up with what the computer says is the best move, which is b6, with something like the following idea, namely, first, that queen takes a7 is not actually a problem. And here's a sample line that sort of shows why that is. First, just notice, of course, the knight is protecting b6 here, so we have a move like rook a8, queen b7. The queen has to sort of get itself somewhat trapped in our territory, which is always an ominous thing to have to do. B takes c5, bishop takes, knight d takes c5, d takes c5, knight takes c5. Again, this is sort of just a sample line. I'll sort of bring us to the end of it here. So the knight hitting the bishop retreats, knight b1, c5 hitting the knight. Again, there's some action here on this point, and always in this line, black is just trying to get at b2. Again, white blocks it off with the bishop here supporting. c4 disrupting that support, a4. And even though it's not obvious sort of how or why, possibly it's not obvious, why black has just got a decisively winning advantage here. I mean, especially just if you just straightforwardly look at the material is exactly equal. But again, like I've said in other videos, just a really instructive point about dynamics in chess, right? Look at the quality of black's pieces. Look at the piece activity. I mean, look at these pieces. They just look ridiculous on the back rank versus these pieces. And even black's rooks are fantastic. You got the space advantage in the center. So even though there's not a material, tactical knockout blow, like, you get the sense that it's coming soon. So yeah, I thought a really instructive point there. Of course, when I played b6, I didn't see that far ahead to sort of see all that was winning. But I saw enough that this at least was going to be problematic for white. And so yeah, I mean that's sort of what happened. The computer didn't take on a7. They played c takes b6. And then I played this move, queen takes b6, just with the thought that I was applying pressure here. In some cases, if the bishop moves, I might be attacking here. It just intuitively looks like a good move. I spent a little time on this, so I'm sort of disappointed to see that the engine actually says that this is a mistake. So instead of queen takes b6 from this position, it actually says just going ahead and putting the intermediate move. Bishop takes b4 is best. And I think here I was scared of this move b takes a7. And it turns out I should not have been. Yeah, I mean, basically the idea is that, we have rook b7. And, if they try to queen, we're covering that twice with the queen and the rook. I think a point that I failed to appreciate, just oddly enough in the game, I just saw that they had bishop takes a7 hitting my rook, and I was like, boy, and I kind of just steered away from it and didn't think more about the line like I should have. So if the line continues here, queen takes c6, rook takes a7, just getting rid of that pawn. Knight jumping in and attacking the rook, counter-attacking the queen. The queen retreats, the rook gets out of the attack, hitting the bishop. Counter-attacking white's knights, and if white takes on d6, then of course we can recapture here. If they take our bishop, as in this line, then their pawn structure kind of looks ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, black is just doing excellently in this position as well. White's got the doubled pawns. Black's piece activity is just better. Black has got a nearly decisive advantage here. So, yeah, I wish I would have seen that. And instead I play this queen takes b6. Again, it says bishop takes b4. Again, I was scared of b takes a7. But also, if you get queen takes b4, which is sort of another natural response, there's rook takes b6 hitting the queen, queen a4. And once again, white or black has a nearly decisive advantage given their piece activity. Given their central control. Yeah, I wish I would have appreciated this, because this would have been a nice place to take an advantage in the game. But yeah, so I had queen takes b6, not an awful move. I'm still got a clear advantage, close to winning. Bishop takes e7, rook takes e7, and rook f to e1. And here I played a somewhat of an inaccuracy. So I sort of mentioned 4 or 5 moves ago that I had been trying to gear up for this break, or another break that I was thinking about was c5. And I went for the e5 break after a bit of thought, but in this situation, turns out that was a bit of an inaccuracy. I should have taken here. I was actually scared of this. It's probably the main reason that I steered away from this, but it's nothing to be scared of, in fact. We can just take on a2. They can, take a pawn on c6. We can take their knight. They'll exchange and check us on c8, forking king and knight, getting their piece back. But the point here is that this extra passed pawn is going to be a place for an advantage for black, a really nice advantage, in fact. But instead of that, I played e5. And yeah, after this move, I'm starting to see in a lot of variations that this pawn is going to come under attack, or under some pressure. It already is. I had seen that, of course, before I played e5, but for whatever reason I thought I had it covered. But it turns out I was wrong. If I take So in this position, if I take here, the knight comes in. It's another thing attacking c6, also attacking my loose bishop in that case. So I felt pretty, uh, pretty, let's say, disappointed, or I didn't feel great about my position after rook a to c1 landed. But after a while, I came up with what was the best move in the position. And it turns out not only is this saving my position, it's actually, um, it's by far the best move in the position. It's basically an only move to save the position and to keep, as it turns out, black to keep an advantage. Not honestly at this point in the game did I have the intuition that I had an advantage. This just seemed so messy that I would have been fine to eke something out, and sort of have a solution to that issue with c6 that I just pointed out. But yeah, it turns out black is got a clear advantage here. Computer went in for knight takes e5, which turns out to be a mistake. So instead of knight takes e5, the engine says d takes c5 is a better option. So a sample line goes something like this, hitting the queen. And I'll just sort of go through this kind of quickly, and we'll sort of see the position that ends up. So e8, defending this rook, in case this knight wants to move somewhere, wherever it wants to go. Bishop b5, hitting the bishop, protecting the bishop, so bishop b5. This knight move here also hits the queen, so that's why the queen's got to move. And now the rook here gets out of the attack, hitting the bishop. The bishop attacks f3, hits our knight, responding here. So one thing I would look at, and I would just sort of point out with the computer analysis, if you go through computer analysis, you'll see, and I think this is just generally a really instructive point, each side is putting threats on the other side. There's no like really slow moves, if at all possible. And I think that's a thing that we should try to remember in our own games, that we really want to look for those forcing moves to sort of make make your opponent respond, as opposed to things that are relatively slow. I think that's a really instructive point that I get out of like any engine analysis that I do. There's just the moves are just forcing and something the opponent has to respond to. So bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, knight c to f e4, getting out of the attack, trading rooks, bishop to d3, bringing the knight in to reinforce, bringing the rook to the open file, getting back to defend the 8th rank, b5, getting out of the attack. So in this position, black is doing better. Central control, better pieces, I would say. The knights are nicely reinforcing each other here, as opposed to necessarily stepping on each other's toes. White's struggling to, gain some activity for their pieces. I would definitely take black here, and the computer says clear advantage for black, close to decisive. But yeah, so that would have been a way to go in this position, this d takes c5 kind of way. But instead, the computer went knight takes e5, and this gives black a really, basically a decisive advantage. I recapture, d takes e5, and here, this kind of felt like a situation where I didn't need to automatically recapture, and so I sort of looked around for alternatives that I could do and sort of delay recapturing, because this pawn is not defended. If I can go attack something else, it's not like they're going to be able to defend against that attack and also defend this pawn. That was generally my thinking. And I came up with the move bishop to d7 with the idea that this queen might be somewhat annoying over here. The queen is not probably going to go back to these squares, especially to c2 because of the bishop's move there. I think in general, I was just looking to get the queen sort of back in its territory. But it turns out this move is actually a blunder, and I should have went for either something like queen g6, which is a move I played actually on the next turn. I could have also went for queen takes b2, or just sort of the normal rook takes e5. All those kind of options would have been better, significantly better than bishop d7. But yeah, it is what it is. It sort of made sense in the game. Turns out it wasn't the greatest. Computer responds with queen d1, hitting this point. And here, and sort of the point here is, I mean, I can recapture, but they're making it difficult for me. So I played this move, queen g6, just sort of lining up here, introducing threats like this. Yeah, it seemed like a sensible move to make. They take my pawn, and here I played bishop c6, which I thought was a cool move. The engine's recommendation here is just to take on h3, which of course I saw, but I decided to be cute, of course, with the queen supporting this, and the idea was that I could move my knight somewhere and just have a mate threat on g2 after the queen moves. But as it turns out, as we'll see, there's a lot of options for white to kind of gum up the works there. And that really speaks to why this move, bishop c6, was relatively speaking inaccurate, as opposed to a move like queen takes c6. Or sorry, not queen takes c6, but bishop takes h3. I do apologize. So if we got a move like bishop takes h3, just a sample variation would be something like bishop f3, defending the mate threat, knight g5, trying to get rid of the bishop in some lines, and reintroduce the mate threat, assuming you could do something about the queen here. Knight c4, bishop e6, hitting the queen, queen to d1, taking the knight, trading off the minor pieces, hitting the queen again. And this is sort of a cool tactical sequence, I thought. So we trade, well, not trade. Well, yeah, we're sort of just trading a bunch of pieces here in kind of a fancy tactical way. Rook takes b2, queen c8 check, king h7, e4, and rook takes a2. And the whole point of this sequence is just sort of to point out this is pretty equal. But, I mean, who would you rather have? Look at the two kings. Look at black's piece activity. These pawns really don't impress. The outside pass pawn possibly has a little bit more advantage. It is objectively pretty equal, but I'd rather have black in this situation. But yeah, they played queen takes d6. I played bishop c6. Queen d3. Rook d7. Trying to get the queen off of this diagonal, but of course they don't need to. So they retreat to b8. Computer actually recommends queen a6 here. Which is interesting. So let's check that out, because in the game, I thought, if the queen gets off this diagonal and is therefore not x-raying my queen, then if I can move this knight somewhere and just open up this threat, I should be in business. But engine says, nope, there's a way to get around that. And so here's just an example line. So black tries to do that, tries to, introduce the mate threat. White has this defense. King h2, rook c7, defending the bishop, which is now attacked twice. Taking our minor piece, queen e6 check, g4, taking their minor piece. And we get a position like this. Again, it's another position that's pretty equal. But I would rather, take the black side of this with the bishop versus the knight. And again, these pawns just strike me as a lot more raggedy than black's pawns, even though black, does have a lot of pawn islands. Just the doubled pawns in particular sort of strike me as weak. But yeah, instead of this move, queen a6, the computer did go in for queen b1. And then, my thinking was just to get out of the diagonal and allow myself to move this knight. So I played queen g5, which it turns out is a mistake. So here's a sample line that I also think is instructive. So this is best play from the computer, or from the engine. So this in particular, this is why I steered away, I think, initially just superficially from f5, was because of this en passant capture. Then you got to get your queen off of this file, and I feel like that's just, missing the point. But if we go a little further in the line here, I think it's interesting to sort of see how it turns out. So knight h2, king e2, queen takes, rook takes, bishop takes, rook d2, bishop takes on h3, queen g6 check, king c3, knight f3, rook d1. And here, again, we've got an even material situation, but black is just totally winning. I mean, white's king is incredibly unsafe. Black's king is snug and totally fine. Black's piece activity is just a lot better, and at some point here soon, there's going to be some kind of tactical blow that black's going to be able to land, given these sort of positional advantages. And interestingly, back here, this knight f3 continuation, if we go back a couple moves in the line, the knight was attacking the queen, of course, so the queen gets out of the attack, and then we jump in for this check. If just as a point of interest, if white takes, this bishop setting up here is just really bad for black, or really bad for white, and it's gonna be over pretty quickly. So that's why white can't do that. But yeah, instead of this move f5, I played queen g5, and we got play like this. So they blocked the file. I came in with my rook. Turns out I should have taken on f2, which is a really interesting sort of way to go about things. And then there was this interesting move f5, which is really hard to see. So to see in a game, I need to take here. I need to sacrifice a piece for a pawn to bring the king out. I need to sacrifice a piece for a pawn in order to bring the king out into the middle, to then play a move that can be captured by en passant, the whole point of which is that if they don't capture by en passant, you're hitting the bishop, and if the bishop moves, then this is checkmate. So yeah, so they don't capture by en passant. The only other way to go besides moving the bishop that sort of makes any sense is this move queen takes f5, at which point superficially you might think, white's stopping things here, there's got to be a queen trade, but no, black's got this move rook f8 because they brought white's king out. They can line the queen up. There's queen takes f8, king takes f8. So yeah, I thought this was a really cool line. This would have been better slightly than the move that I chose, which was rook d2. Just one of many sort of interesting tactical lines in this game. So yeah, rook d2, and then they played rook c2, and it looks like maybe they're kind of stopping my attack, but I went ahead anyway, just sort of with a general thought in the back of my head that, if there's this trade, then this is hitting the queen, that's going to gain me tempi. Those sort of considerations go into the variation. So I hit their bishop, just trying to get it out of the way, because again, in a lot of variations, I want to be lined up on g2. And then they played this move f4, which when I saw it, it felt like oh no, this is just hitting everything. As you can see, it's a total blunder. But it felt like, oh no, this is hitting everything. What am I gonna do here? I can't take here. I can't really retreat, because if I retreat to g6, they take my rook. I take back, then our queens are lined up. Um, so yeah, I got hung up with all these like thoughts about seeing this move as unexpected. I'm gonna have to do some kind of retreat. I don't see anything, and yeah, oddly enough, I spent a while on this, and then I was just like, oh yeah, there's just queen h4 in this position, lining up here. And when I finally did notice queen h4, I was like, yeah, this f4 move is totally just a paper tiger. So just out of interest, so f4 was a blunder, as it turns out. Engine says should have had some kind of line like this. So really interesting play here, once again, from the computer. Instructive, I would definitely say. So really interesting line here where it's roughly equalish. White is up a rook for a pawn, but because of the king safety issues and because of the great activity of black's pieces, black should be able to have sort of a drawish position and actually, if anything, be the one who's pressing for a win. So we get to a position like this. Once again, white's doubled pawns here really don't impress. The bishop is nice in this kind of position where we got pawns on both sides of the board. It's roughly equalish as of right now, but if anybody's playing for a win there, it's definitely black. And that's the sort of road that white could have went down, sort of following rook takes d2, but instead they made this move, which was a blunder, f4. So I come in with my queen. They retreat with their bishop, and here I thought a while about this move. I sort of figured out all the variations in advance. The very first move that I thought of was the move that I went with, queen f2 check. I really wanted to make sure it worked, especially with this ever-present threat that they can just take my rook and does it just diffuse my attack. But turns out no. No, that's not the case. So king h1 is what they played. Interestingly, I mean, it's worth noting that this move doesn't work either. Queen takes f2, rook takes d2, queen g3 check, king g1, knight takes d2, and then engine is just like, give up your queen, rook e2. Yeah, this is, and when you don't have to take a queen that's on pre, but you can just kind of line up like this, as the computer is suggesting to do, like, this is just totally over. Totally over for black, or sorry, totally over for white. So it's an alternative, just to point out that king h2 does not work either. So yeah, king h1 was played, knight g3 check, and this was the most obvious move, I think, to me as a human. Instead of knight g3 check, it turns out it is actually a little bit more accurate to play like this. Rook takes, knight takes. If they play queen takes, then this is hanging. So knight takes, knight g3 check. So sort of delaying the knight g3 check. King h2, bishop takes f3, taking advantage of the pin. Defending against the mate threat. h4 just supporting the knight, so that when queen e1 comes, queen takes c2 can happen and the knight isn't hanging. b3, and then once again, I mean, black is just totally winning. Up a bishop and a knight, and their pieces are just swarming all over white's king. So yeah, instead of that slightly more accurate move, I played knight g3 check, which again, totally winning. King h2, Bishop takes f3, taking advantage of the pin. Rook takes d2, queen takes d2, rook g1, and then rook takes b2, with the idea of having a double threat here of not only capturing here, but if it's black to move, this is actually the best continuation. Queen takes b2, or queen takes g2, rook takes g2, and then rook takes g2, which with the knight covering h1 is a nice little checkmate. So yeah, really interesting tactical game. If we look at the report on this game, it's actually kind of interesting and instructive, I think. Because other games that I've played recently, I've mentioned in other videos, I've gotten a lot of end games. And if you look at the sort of headline number in terms of accuracy, those games suggest that either I was or the opponent was playing like awesomely in the mid to high 90s. But again, if you play end games, you'll see that it's a lot easier to be more accurate. But this game, I had the advantage essentially for most of the game, but there's a lot of swings in here, which really sort of speaks to the tactical difficulties that we kind of went through. And the headline number is, me as the winner, I had only an 82.8 or 82.2% accuracy rating, because again, the tactics of the different positions were really tough. And if you look at the relative inaccuracies, mistakes, and blunders for each side, there were a lot more because it was just a really complicated tactical game. So yeah, a case where the computer definitely, in the Chess Free app, it definitely provides, really interesting play. I do hope you guys got something out of that game. Let me know in the comments, and yeah, I'll be looking forward to making some new content here soon. Otherwise, until next time, we'll see you guys then, and have a good rest of the night.